Okay, so we're holding this week in Shavuot Shechal B'Av Tisha B'Av, which I think in all Kehilas and Klal Yisrael is already the time where we mark the Chorban in specific acts and stuff. So I thought it would be a good time to talk about the element of Tipis Yeshua that is being Misabel in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, I really want to frame it like this. My question is as follows. And I don't know that it's biyachalti to resolve this question, but the question is as follows. If one could be meisif all sorts of their own ideas of Zeichel Chorban, and could add this and that, and they'll make up their own way to be masker the Chorban at all times, is that L'mal Yusa? It's good to every day, every minute, figure out a way to be masker the Chorban? Or are there prescribed methods that Chazal gave us, different times of the years, different actions, different activities that we do throughout the year, and that's what you do. More than that is not desirable. To just wallow in self-pity and be misabel on the Chorban every day, every week, every minute, that's maybe not desirable. That's the question. I don't know that we could resolve this, and it could be that there's more than one school of thought, and it could be that for different people and different times there's a different right answer. But let's talk about it a little bit like this. I came across, to me, was an amazing story, so interesting, that has to do with this. In the beginning of the state of Israel, like in the 40s, through the early 50s, there was a huge migration from all the Sephardic countries to Israel. Be'erach 900,000 or between 8 and 900,000 Sephardim from all over the world made their way to Eretz Yisrael and became part of that kehillah, part of that community. Now, there was a small, isolated kehillah amongst the Sephardi world in Yemen, in Taiman, Yahadus Taiman, a small isolated community. Was Be'erach 50,000 Jews, call it, which was, substantially smaller than some of the other communities, and it was very isolated. It was its own thing. They were very backward, very primitive. They lived in a country that was very primitive. They had been isolated. They were primitive in their Yiddishkeit, primitive in their Goyishkeit. They lived in a kehillah that was very separated from the rest of Klal Yisrael. Now, a lot of them were very excited to come when the Israeli government started flying them in Operation Magic Carpet. When the Israeli government started, there's two big airlift Operation Magic Carpets in the 40s. One is when the United States flew supplies into Berlin during the beginning of the Cold War, and one is when the Israeli government flew all the Yemeni Jews out of Yemen into Eretz Yisrael. But the Operation Magic Carpet Yemen edition, when they began to bring all these Jews in, so they discovered lots of different, call it minhagim and kehillas. There was a lot of color that Klal Yisrael didn't know that it had. That these groups had different than everybody else. Now, there was one subsect of the Yemeni Kehillah that I want to focus on now for a second. In 1944, the first group of Yemeni Jews came, and they were in I think it's called the Maboret, like a transit camp, a refugee camp in Israel in 1944. And there was a guy whose job was to survey the people who had came, and he was walking around taking a survey of the Jews there, and he came across an older guy whose name was Yichya, and two younger Jews with him who looked very different than all the rest of the Taimani Jews who were there. Now, Taimanim have the long, simanim, the long payas, the dark, long payas. And he came, this group of three, they were the same, I guess, color as the rest of the Jews there, but they looked extremely different. They had no payas, and they had no mustaches. They had long beards like the Amish, but no mustaches, no payas, and they had a bowl haircut, cut over here, and going down to here, and the hair was down shoulder length. That was the hair. Very interesting haircut, like a long haircut down to the shoulders. They all had the same haircut. So he stops them, and Miftah, Tamani, he asks them, what brings you here? Who are you? And they say, he says, one of them is the spokesman, Ani Yichya Mitayman, and I'm looking for the king, David Melech Yisrael. We heard there's a Tekuma, and we're looking for the king. And the guy tells him, well, listen, I don't want to let you down, but there's no king. We do have a David. His name is Ben Gurion, not Melech Yisrael. It's similar. It's not exactly the same. So Yichya says, I come with a message from my community, and I want to meet him. I want to talk to him. So he says, it doesn't, I can't really get you into him, but tell me about your message, and I'll see what I could do. So he starts telling him that we're Jews from a small province far out in Taiman called Chakan. It's in the region of Chatzar Maves, which is an Arabic word, not Chatzar Maves. I mean, it's in Islam, it's an Arabic word, Chatzar Maves, but we live over there. We're a small kehillah, about 400 people, and we're not connected to anybody else. We have our own minhagim, our own situation, and we're ready to maybe come up. I wanted to explore coming up to Eretz Yisrael, and I want to meet him. And Simseif, there's a whole conversation. He brings them to Yerushalayim for Shabbos, to Yitzchak ben Tzvi, who later on becomes the president of Israel, but at that time was heading this initiative, and they're fascinated by them. And there's actually a few svarim that came out later on of the different minhagim of Yehudei Chakan, mostly where Shtel Zechais is in Hilchas Brachas. Like their jachnun is fried differently than other temeni jachnun, and the bracha is different. Like these type of examples, like that actually come with negei halacha. But at some point he asks them, "Why do you look different than all the rest of the temeni Jews that I see over here?" And they say, "No, what do you mean? Us? Anachnu avei leitziyah. We're the avei leitziyah." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "In our kehila, we don't cut our hair, and we all grow it long, and this is how we remember the Churban at all times. We're the avei leitziyah." He says, Avei Leitzion? He says, yeah, that's what we are. And then they did a little research, and they found that there's an entry in the travelogue from the 1200s from Binyamin of Tudela, where he writes that in Teiman there's a kehila of Avei Leitzion, and he doesn't write that they're in Chakan, but L'chaira, it's the same people who migrated, and there was this kehila. Now, eventually, they taka in 1950, they come to Eretz Yisrael, they sell it, they move to like a small moshav in the backyard of Ben Gurion Airport. And they were silversmiths. Like the Yodim used to go to them to have the silver fixed. They were, excellent handcrafted silver. Today you won't see any more a person from Chakan with long hair and no beard. They've since integrated into the general Israeli population. But I got and looked it up. There's a small museum in the Moshav. I think it's called Mivreshet, maybe right outside Ben Gurion. If someone's looking for a tourist attraction, next time you're there, there's like a little house museum of these Jews. Now, Agabanim, what struck me is this minig that they had, that by them, Avelos on Tzion, being and from the Avei Tzion, took such a central role that it defined how they dressed, how they looked, meaning they behaved differently than everybody else. Now, the truth is that in our world, we don't find this. You don't find groups of people who had minhagim of Avei Tzion. In the Karaim, there was groups that had Avei Tzion like this, but these are people who lived independently from the Karaim, so l'chayra it's not connected. Now, so that's an example of finding it, out in the wild. Now let's handle it a little bit l'maisa. So now, clearly we know that the Churban and the Avelis on the Churban plays a very central role in Yiddishkeit. Ad Kedei Kach, the Gemara in Brachos and the Gimel tells us that it says Tanya Rabbi Yosi one time went into a chorva to daven. The Gemara tells us a story. And it says he heard he put himself in danger, and he got saved. And then eventually he's asked, what did you hear when you were in the churva? And he says, Shemati baskel shemenahemes k'yoyna. I heard a baskel that was crying out like a yoyna. It was saying, what does it say? It says, Oy lebanim sheva v'neseim echrafti espesi v'serafti esechali v'higleisim b'num esayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was crying out and saying, like, woe is to the father whose children were exiled from his table, and woe is to the children who had to be exiled from their father's table. So you see clearly that Eliyahu Navi tells him, I promise you that not today alone is when this baskel is going out. And it says this: every day HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends a baskel that's crying out and saying this avelus on the Churban. We know the Shulchan Aruch and Simon Gimel says, and that's a daily halacha. That's not a halacha that's only said during the Bein HaMetzarim. So we know clearly there is makim for centralizing, for making Avelis on the Churban into like a primary focus of Jews. So now, really, this Shtel Zechais, this dichotomy of how to, like, what the program is. Should you trying to be adding or trying to take away? Shtel Zechais in many halachic nafkaminas, and we'll get to them in a second. But I just want to say let's call it the downside of this. So the downside is as follows. There's a Gemara in Baba Basra in the Samach Mudbeis that says a story as follows. It says, La'achad the Churban of the Bayis Sheni, there was the Prushim in Klal Yisrael who decided that they're not going to eat meat and they're not going to drink wine anymore. And the rationale was simple. They said, basar that was nekar v'gavim mizbeach, we're going to eat now when there's no mizbeach, and yayin shenis nasach v'gavim mizbeach, we're going to drink that now when there's no mizbeach. It's meglach. We can't continue to behave like everything's normal. We're not going to drink basar v'yayin. So the Gemara says, "Tapal b'hem Rabbi Yeshua." Chazal, the Rabbanim sent Rabbi Yeshua to deal with them, go talk to them, explain to them their error. So Rabbi Yeshua tells them, he says, "How do you eat any bread or anything like that? It was used for menachas. The v'gavim mizbeach." He says, Vestim is that you'll just eat Paris, you'll have a vegan diet. Paris are brought for Bikurim. So you say you live on water. Water was used for Nisach HaMayim. He says, so Mamela, Lemitzini Yedenu V'Ragleinu, you're not going to be able to exist. Elamai, he says, so what do? He says, so Chazal, he says, so So what they ask him is, they say, so why takana? So why don't we have these Xeris? So no, in Geyser and Xer Latzibur, if the Tzibur can't handle it. It says to make it too extensive and too extreme, das kemenish, this is what should we do? Chazal made a handful of Xeris, a kala is not Yotzei B'Hinuma, a chasen wears some ashes, we break a glass, during the Yemei Mitzarim, we have additional dinim. The Gemara Basra says that Rabbi Shua explained to them that it has to be with moderation. To make a gzeira that's going to be so all-encompassing, if the Avelis is going to be so all-encompassing, it's impossible. Klal Yisrael can't go forward like that. So we do, a few token mascaras for the Beis HaMikdash to be masked the Avelis of Tzin, but we don't let it dominate our lives. That's what the Gemara Basra is mashma, what the mashmaris of the Gemara Basra is. Now, there are Gemaras that seem like there were certain yechidim. There's Gemara in Tainus, there's Gemara in Bava Kama, certain yechidim who wore black shoes or did different, customs for Maskeh the Churban. So it seems that even according to the Gemara of Basra, there's makam for yechidim who are feeling, extra connected to be manning their lives in a way that they add additional things. But for a tzibur to make rules where we're going to add, many additional zeichel churbans, that would be taking it too far. Now, so now as follows. Where's the Shtel Zechais a little bit? So this past Shabbos Chazayin. So for us this week especially, it was mamash a regular Shabbos. We had a party, but generally in Klal Yisrael today, Shabbos Chazayin has become more or less a regular Shabbos, right? It's not the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch Paskins that you're not even supposed to wear Shabbos clothing, for example, in the Minig Ashkenaz. Now, but by us today, Shabbos Chazayin is pretty much a regular Shabbos. But back in the day, there was a few very strange customs and minhagim that were done on Shabbos Chazayin. So now in the Ashkenazi Welt, there was an idea of saying l'chadaydi v'nusach Eilei Tzion. Right, the only Litvish song that we have b'chlal is Eilei Tzion. It's the only song Litvak sings. So Eilei Tzion was the nusach that they used to sing l'chadaydi during Shabbos Chazayin. Now I think still today in real Yekish shuls they do that, but that's a minig that used to be extremely popular that fell away completely. Now we'll see why in a second. Now another one that was more prevalent, not just by the Ashkenazi Yidden, was they had kinnis that they said on Shabbos Chazayin. In different books of kinnis that are out in the Sephardi world, the Egyptian and other Sephardim, they had kinnis that they actually said on Shabbos, which is a pliya. We don't do any minhagei avelos on Shabbos, and they had actual kinnis that they would say on Shabbos. Now, this is Muskir L'mashal. The Meiri brings this down in Magen Avis, that the kinnis, the Rivash has a tshuva where the Shail asked him that we don't have anyone in the tzibur who knows the nusach for the kinnis of Shabbos Chazayin. What should we do? So you see clearly the Kehillah that he's writing in Algeria and Spain and remember the different Kehillahs amongst the Sephardi world were saying kinnis on Shabbos of Shabbos Chazayin. Now, the Poskim came along, different shuvas, but the Radvaz and the Zkan Aaron and others came along and they said very strongly that, Avelos on Shabbos, even if it's not for Hesya, even if it's not real Avelos, it's just the kinnis, is mamish inappropriate, it's not acceptable, and mainly you have to be battle this minig. The people who were pro this minig said that it's meforish in the pasuk. The pasuk in Eicha says, "Shabbos Mesais Libeinu Nepach Leva Mechalenu." Shabbos itself becomes transferred la'avelis. They said, and the Tzad Shekineged said, "No, Shabbos is a time they can't have any avelis. You can't have any of these minhagim of saying kinnis, of singing different songs." And they worked very hard to mevatel it. Now, the ones who really pushed it away and mevatel it strongly. So the Arizal, first of all, in the Ilum Mekubalim, the Arizal ascribed givessa importance to Shabbos Chazayin as a Shabbos of Simcha. And pushed away all these minhagim of Avelis on Shabbos and all these extra additional Shabbos Chazayin minhagim. But the ones who really pushed it away is the Chassidim. Amongst the early Chassidish Rebbes, there was a very big push to do away with a lot of the Avelis and even of the 9 days, but especially the Shabbos Chazayin. Lamashal, the Arizal's yahrzeit is today. Today's the Arizal's yahrzeit. Today's Hey, right? Today's Hey. The Arizal's yahrzeit is today. Hey Av. In many Chassidish Kehillas, they make a yahrzeit tish, a real get-together, a happy get-together for that Arizal's yahrzeit. They have a siyum in Rishon, they would make a siyum, they would eat fleishiks, the Vichayim, not just on Hey Av, the rest of the 9 days, they'd make tish with the siyum. The Chiddushei HaRim used to make a siyum. By the Chassidish Rebbes, it was a big push to make siyumim and to make the 9 days less avelistic, less sad. They felt that in today's day, in today's time, the Olam can't handle the intensity of the sadness for the 9 days, for 3 weeks, and they made a big push to moderate it and do away with it. To the point where today Siyum became extremely ragil and popular by everyone, meaning they won, so to speak. They integrated that part of doing away with Avelis into the regular halach yelech of a Jew in the 9 days. Now, so clearly the Gemara Bava Basra and the Chassidish and Haga and all these different things that we're showing seems to show that the idea is not to be like Chakan. It's not to walk around and grow your hair and go through all year, being avelistic and adding and being meisif, at least for regular people. The idea is more to try to go on, to try to moderate, to try to, of course, you keep the churban in the foreground, and you have to remember it, and zikr during the 3 weeks and the 9 days is actual halachas. Halachas are not malleable. You can't push those away. There's nothing. You can't work around those. But the idea of being meisif l'chayra would seem to be maybe shalol lefi ruach, the mekubalim and the chasidim, whatever. So let me just show you that even Minei Ubei, it doesn't seem to be so simple. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Gimel tells us, based on a Gemara in Brachas, that at Chatzos, or at the Shinei HaMishmaris, when the Mishmaris time changes in the nighttime, it's a big Eis Ratzon V'Shas Tefillah. The Mechaber says that if you daven during that time of Chatzos, during the Shinei HaMazalas, it's a time when you could accomplish amazing things. Now, the Mechaber doesn't elaborate, it doesn't say anything more than that, but in the Kisvei Ari, it's much more elaborate, and the Arizal gives over a Mesorah by Tikkun Chatzos. I think it's in the Arizal, it's called Tikkun Rachav Aleya, and there's, it's been added to extensively, but even in the Arizal gives over Mesorah of Tikkun Chatzos, and Tikkun Chatzos became a very primary thing by the Mekubalim. Now, Tikkun Chatzos is exactly what we're talking about. It's an additional Maskeras of Avelis on the daily. It's every day to sit down on the floor and be masker that we're Aveli Tziyah. So, like I said in the beginning, I don't know that it's possible to resolve this conflict of are you supposed, maybe not for that Mainam, exactly. But Arizal and his Chavraya were certainly pushing it, this idea of Tikkun Chatzos. So Yankel's maybe not for that Mainam. So that's what I wanted to get to. The Rav Srei the Blitzky has a whole kuntras on Tikkun Chatzos, where the point of his kuntras is to encourage Hamainam to say Tikkun Chatzos. His point is that yes, it seems like something very lofty, it's Kabbalistic, it's Kabbalim, it's Arizal, we don't really know what it means, but it's for everybody. And in there he brings two tshuvas. He brings one he brings from the Ben Ish Chai, the Beis Chaim of Baghdad, and it's an arichas tshuva. I won't read the whole thing, but in it, actually, the first thing that the Ben Ish Chai quotes, strangely, is the Nefesh HaChaim. Ben Ish Chai starts off, the Shaila, someone asked him that, I don't understand much about anything, and I'm going to say Tikkun Chatzos, I'm going to sit on the floor and pretend that I'm sad and say these tefillas. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know, is this something that, there's something that I need to do? And he writes to him one second. So he writes like this. He brings as follows from Rav Chaim Volozhin. Rav Chaim Volozhin Nefesh HaChaim says, the main focus, this is a very primary part of the Nefesh HaChaim, but it's just interesting that the Ben Ish Chai brings it. He says the main focus of how to do mitzvahs is the chelik ha'maisa. Taras ha'machshava ein ela mitztarefes l'maisa. Taras ha'machshava is a nice addition. It's a nice additive to have onto the mitzvahs. Well, the mitzvah lo liikuva. It's a tesefes mitzvah. It's not liikuva. V'chein mavur l'chol maskel yasher hoylech. Harei kaimelam binyan hakravas hakarbanas testaman klishmandam. He says even hakravas karbanas we paskin in the Gemara in Zvachim in the beginning staman lishman. The machshavas and the deeper meanings, that's that's l'tesefes, that's a mitzvah. V'chein amulahadi benazir he brings ochas haPesach. And then he continues on, he says, not only mitzvahs maisias, she has gam mitzvahs atfila, shenikras avodah shebelev. Tefillah is called avodah shebelev, that's what it's called. And Chazal learned out from a pasuk that says, la'avdi b'chol avavchem, im kol zeh ha'ikr shetzarach ha'adam, lachtech b'svasav dafka kol teva mimatbeas atfila k'mashkas Razal. It says the ikr still, even by tefillah, that's called avodah shebelev, its main, defining characteristic, is avodah shebelev. The ikr thing is to be lachtech b'svasav, to read it out, to say it out. And the Avada, he's not saying you shouldn't have kavanah. Having kavanah is amazing. It's extra. It's better. It's great. This is a little bit reminiscent of the Neid Yehuda that we spoke about, L'Shem Yichud. That the ikr kavanah is to do the mitzvahs, to do the ma'aseh mitzvah. And this is actually, he says, then he brings, even from the Kabbalistic world, it says, V'yudua v'zayir b'kisvei arizal, she'inyan atfilu tikna ilamis, it's, v'salas pnimius, and etc. But in Afal Bikin, he says, the way you do that, he says, he brings from that Arizal, is Akim Asvasav Ave Maisa. Just by Oikim Asvasav, by saying the words out, is how you do all those Hechar Zachan that you're doing. So he continues, it's a big arichas, but what his punchline is that even, he says, here, he says, so this that you're telling me, that you don't understand anything, and you don't want to do Tikkun Chatzos because you don't know the Kabbalistic meanings, and you don't know what you're saying, he says, Hinei Tainas HaYetzer, Shemarat Lafayim B'Simanim Tahira, it's coming to affirm a Yetzirah. The Yetzer Hara is showing you the chazafisel. It's showing you the chazafisel. It's telling you like, it's not for you, you're not holding by it, don't do it. This is a frumah Yetzer Hara, k'dei levatel es ha'adam mikiyam mitzvahs sadarim shebekdusha. It's a frumah Yetzer Hara that's coming to mevatel you from doing the kiyam mitzvahs b'kedusha. Now he says, afilu mi libcha tarud harbe, al tevatel amiris tikkun chatzos. Even if your mamish not, you're not holding by it, you can't concentrate, don't be mevatel from doing it. And the chiddush that he brings over here, and this is something that you'll find in different svarim that paskin like the Kesveri, he says that during the 3 weeks, maybe not the whole year, but during the 3 weeks, if it's too hard for you to stay up at night and you can't do it, say it by yom. The way he calculates it, he says the Skulas Hazman starts at Chatzos HaLayla. It doesn't end until Chatzos HaYom. So you could say it any time between Chatzos HaLayla to Chatzos HaYom. Mele, he says, and I don't think this is something that's pushed by regular poskim, but one of the Ben Ish Chai is taking the Arizal's Tikkun Chatzos and building it up into something mamash v'hamaynam, especially during the 3 weeks, especially during this time of year, and saying you do it, even if you can't understand it, even if you don't know what you're doing, you say it anyhow, even if it can't be chatzos, and even if it can't be chatzos. Now, he also brings from the Ned Yehuda in a drush and tzlach, Ned Yehuda says the same thing. Ned Yehuda says, v'akopanim ben halaimdim, so it's a little bit more narrowly tailored, ubein dalas ha'am koydem kol davar yisadru seder tikkun chatzos, l'hayrid moyes adalas hashchina, Sisu at the Messiah, befrat bezman hazeh, v'niseinu harab. Now the Goyin, again, in counter to what the Chassidim were pushing at that time, saying that bezmanenu, we can't be misabel too much, we need to be happier. So the Ned Yehuda often is a counterbalance to this. The Goyin, the Ned Yehuda says as follows: it says befrat bezman hazeh, v'niseinu harab misgabrim harashon v'noisnin koyach l'klipa. All in Kabbalistic lingo, this causes the arichas galisenu. V'roye lasis milchama b'tachpulas neged haklipas ulahatish koycham ayidei tikkun chatzos. Says the way to fight with the klipas that are extending the galus, that are lengthening the galus, is to say tikkun chatzos. V'roye l'chalechad lihizar b'zeh yosim asher hayitzricham adaris harishonim. V'roye l'chalechad lihizar more today than ever before. Before, they didn't have to worry. It wasn't such a skabrus. They didn't have to worry about adding and being masker the chorban. But today, the klipas and the arichas hagalos, it's more important than ever before. Lizar v'zeki achshav tzarach l'haitzim v'libin shal tzdukim ad kan l'shayne v'reya b'dush chavei. He continues, but so he collects from ranging from the Ben Ish Chai to the Ned Yehuda, saying that bezmanenu is more of a primary reason to say tikkun chatzos and to be focused on it. So I think I'm going to leave us maybe more confused than we started. I don't think there's a resolution to this. These two polars of adding and being, extra focused on the Churban, or saying that people are not holding by it and need to be happier and try to mitigate the anhagis and make siyumim and etc. I don't know. I'll just end off with one mamash, like a tidbit that was interesting to me. It's not mamash connected to this, but a tidbit in regards to people creating their own minhagim. Meaning, we start off like if a person could just say I'm not going to wear slippers as a Zeichel Chorban. It's more comfortable for me to wear slippers. I'm not going to wear slippers for a Zeichel Chorban. Could a person mamish create from whole cloth his own things? I came across this recently, and I think it's interesting. I'll just share it. The Eish Kodesh, the Pietzet, the Rebbe, the Pietzets and the Rebbe has a very interesting sefer called Tzav V'Zirus. It's a diary. Diaries are a very rare form of literature in the rabbinic world. There's a handful of diaries, maybe. I wouldn't know a total number, but a handful of diaries in rabbinic literature. Tzav V'Zirus is a diary that the Pietzets wrote, and in it is some fascinating things. And in Kapitel Chav Zayin, he brings as follows. He starts off, he says, I want to prove to you, he says, that a Yid could take anything, could take any mundane action in the world, and turn it into, mamash, the holiest thing. He says, you know how? I'll tell you how. He says, because somersaulting, making a tumble sauce while dancing is meaningless, right? It doesn't mean anything. There's no essential heiligkeit to making a tumble sauce. He says, but I know that when I went to the Achnas Sefer Torah, he doesn't say which one, I went to said Achnas Sefer Torah, and I was feeling it. I was feeling full of simcha, and there was no way to express it, just with singing and dancing. There was no way to bring it to the fore, and I decided, I know it's embarrassing, and I know they're going to say it's not appropriate, and they're going to say I'm old, I could hurt my back, I'm doing it. And I got down and I made a tumble sauce. In the middle of the dancing, says the Pietzets, and I did it, and the feelings that I had were amazing. He says, I didn't get to have, rather he legs to, I didn't come to the Giluyim that I thought it would bring me to. He writes it himself, I didn't come to the Giluyim I thought it would bring me to, but Afal Pikein. It was like a Meridik, it sprung forth from me like Avas Hashem and Avas Terase, and I did it. And he says, and you know what? Every time that I think about that somersault, or I pass by the place where I made that somersault, again, I become full of the feeling of that moment in time, that somersault. This is all his own words. He says, so this to me is the greatest proof that you can take anything, the most mundane action, and turn it into some sort of heilig action. So again, I don't know if it's desirable to make mundane actions and add them to Tzeichel Chorban or not, but l'chayra one can if they want to. Maybe it's only for Prushim, maybe it's only for Yechidim, maybe it's not. Okay, we'll end off confused.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.